Hello everyone, it's me, Thomas Fixter, coming to you with a video. The Winston Churchill Guide to Public Speaking. Of our talents, the beloved upon men, none is so precious that the gift of oratory. He who enjoys his will of power more doable than the title of a great king. He is an independent force in the world, Winston Churchill. Ask anyone to name the greatest orators of all time, and Winston Churchill will surely be on, if not topping the list. What do you think of Churchill leading his fellow Englishmen through the darkest days of the World War II, rallying them with the calls to the fight on the beaches and to offer their blood-soiled tears and sweat to defeat the enemy? What do you think of him standing before the House of Commons, his boldish cowardice grow, praising the RAF's finest hour, and unforgettably declaring that never in the field of human conflict was so much owned by so few? Churchill's talent for public speaking seems supernatural, of quality unattainable by the average man. And yet his place in the parliament of oration was far from faded. As a boy, he shuddered and stammered, spoken with lips, and a shy and a timid temperament that hardly commanded the respect of his peers, much less a nation. That he had initiative genius for words that can be no doubt. We have to bring that latest power of to life through tireless effort. As a young man, Winston made only an ambition to be a master of the spoken word, and he honed his prowess like one does any gift, through consistent nurture and practice. When he first entered politics in his 20s, this youthful reputation earned his speeches generally good reviews. Yet he still had a ways to be go. One observed through his rhetorical scene security on limb, while another pursues that Mr. Churchill and O.T. are not neighbours yet. Nor do I think he will likely ever will be. Winston continued to sharpen his craft throughout his life, and from weedy little boy he grew into an orator whose entrance would hush an audience and prompt its members to lean forward in their chairs, and towards the oration as an occupation of his work. Few, if any of us, will ever become a speaker on par with Winston Churchill. Some people have it, that charismatic and irresistible quality in teaching and speaking that cannot be completely learned. But every man can become more better than he is and masterify his own level of natural talent. While we may not be asked to address Parliament, we are all faced with speaking opportunities throughout our lives. Whether it's running for student council president, making a presentation at work, having your voice heard at city council meetings, or offering a eulogy, an act of public speaking makes you more persuasive and powerful man. So the next time you've got to step in from a podium, keep in mind the following advice from the English bulldog himself. Some of his methodologies were uniquely suited for his temperament and time, but all rich sources of guidance and inspiration. Number one, write out what you want to say. Early in his political career, when he was 29-year-old, Churchill was making a speech before the House of Commons in his usual manner. Up to that point, he memorized each and every word of his speeches and performed them without any notes. All had gone well until this moment. As it rests to those who begins to say, but he trails off, losing his train of thought. It rests with those who, he repeats, yet once more he fails at finishing the sentence or pivoting it to another. Look, for 3 long, agonizing minutes, Churchill gropes desperately for his next line and cannot, for the time of him, retrieve it. Next heckles him, his face turns red. Finally, he sets down, putting his head into his hands in utter dejection. He would never make that mistake again. Henceforth, he wrote out his speeches word for word and had their text ever before him. Improvisation is truly a manly art, but so is admitting a weakness. Churchill had the humility to recognise he didn't have the knack for enterous speaking, so he worked around it, so much so that most listeners didn't even realise that he was reading from notes. Churchill created this seamless spontaneity by infusing the speeches with all the energy, dynamism, and natural quality of an impromptu address. He referred to his marks beforehand, so he only had to glance at his script occasionally, and his biographer, William Manchester, describes a technique he employed so that even these glances were safely noticeable. A consummate performer, he would rise when recognized by the speaker, with 2 pairs of glasses in his waistcoat, perching the long-range pair on the end of his nose at such an angle that he could read his notes while giving the impression that he was looking directly at the house. He gave every appeal to speak extravagantly. If the occasion called for quoting a document, he produced a second pair and knocked his voice manner so effectively that even those who knew better believed that everything he said when not quoting was spontaneous. To aid in the flow of delivery, he would set the text of his speeches in what his staff called passive form, a practice that may have inspired by his love of Old Testament. To these haiku blocks, he would add notes for their delivery, when to pause and when to expect ovation, which words and letters emphasize even when to appear to stumble a bit, grope for a word and correct himself. Churchill knew that a flawless rhetorical would put people to sleep, and that more naturalistic speech seemed, the more tuned into his audience would be. Through preparations and practice, Churchill never again acted like the kind of orator he tested, who, before they get up, do not know what they are going to say. When they are speaking, do not know what they are saying, and when they have sat down, do not know what they have said. Number 2, craft your speech with great care. Churchill did not scribble down the drafts of his speeches and call it good. A single 40-minute speech would take 6 hours for him to craft, and be subject to numerous variations. Churchill's keen mind was always thinking of pithy phrases to insert into his speeches, and he came up with new lines in the spare moments between his daily duties. Even his famous wickedism and put-downs were merely improvised on the spot. He had usually thought of a grip and a ways back and felt it were to retrieve just the right moment. Once Churchill's thoughts had marinated in his cranium for a significant amount of time, he dictated them to his secretaries, often while pacing the room in his dressing gown or going or soaking in one of his 2 daily baths. He would then pore over the first draft, studying each sentence and weighing whether the phrasing might be changed to add impact, or whether an adjective might be swapped for better effect. Modal drafts, even sharper, tightened than the last we produced. In fact, Churchill's revision often continued until he was literally running out the door, late again to another appearance in Parliament. Choosing the right words. Knowledge of language is measured by the nice and exact appreciation of words. There is no more important element in the technique of rhetorical than the continual employment of the best possible word. An average person's vocabulary contains about 25,000 words. Churchill had been estimated at 65,000 words. Winston absorbed remnants of words from his voracious appetite for books, which he had picked up as a young man. Though he struggled with most subjects in school, he found an interest, a gift, and a deep, abiding love in reading and writing the English language. During his lifetime, he would read over 5,000 books, ranging from rhetorical and poetry to history and science fiction. His photographer's memory allowed him to remember whole passages from these texts and recite them verum decades later. His brain was like a freshy version of Evernote, his folds containing endless notes on endless subjects when he needed just the right anecdote, and just the right word to get his point across. He simply reached into a file and pulled out the needed pith. He hardly viewed this mental warehouse as a duty. Musty card catalogue either. Words filled him, fascinated him. He delighted in language, musical, magical qualities, and Manchester right. Churchill's feeling for the English tongue was sensual, almost erotic. When he coined the phrase, he would suck it, rolling it around his palate to extract its full flavour. Yet he also liked to use words with layers of procession, and got great satisfaction from the feel of them. Fitting and falling into places like pennies in the slot, Churchill felt that most often the right word for a given grove was the most simple and homespun one you could find, arguing. The reflecting often imagine that the effects of the oratory are produced by the use of long words. The error of this idea will appear from what has been written. The shorter words of a language are usually the more ancient. Their meaning is more ingrained in the national character and they appeal with greater force. Instead of saying agreed to cooperate, he said join hands. Instead of saying aeroplane and aerodrome, as was popular at the time, he said aircraft and airfield. Others said prefabricated, he said ready-made. And when he first took office as Prime Minister, he changed the local defence volunteers to the Home Guard. Can you imagine? Blood, toil, tears and sweat re-ended as hemoglobin and hydration and lamentation as perspiration. Doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? Churchill not only disliked unnecessarily long and flowery words, but bureaucratic jargon and toothless euphemism as well. Where other politicians referred to low-income group, he said the poor. Where they said accommodation units, he said homes. Though Churchill referred short and punchier words, if such one could not fully express his thoughts and feelings, he didn't hesitate to pull out a long meter expression. If no existing word in the language properly fit his intended meaning, he wasn't even opposed to coin a new one, sub it, as a meeting. Middle East and I can all trace their etymologies to Churchill. For infuse your speech with a compelling and musical rhythm. The great influence of sound on the human brain is well known. The senses of the orator, when it appeals to his heart, become long, rolling, and sensuous. The peculiar balance of phrases produces a cadence which resembles blank verse rather than prose. Churchill not only carefully chose his words, but also intentionally crafted the effect and rhythm that came from putting those words, and then sentenced them together. As a result, his speeches had a compelling cadence and rhythm, an almost musical quality. In addition to all his usual tricks, a well-dashed time pause, changing in tempo, Churchill employed various other devices to accomplish this effect. His aim was always to link words together in a way that was pleasing to the ear. As once obscure and reprehensible. Former Prime Minister Lloyd George criticised the phrase as meaningless. Churchill retorted, the bees in those words. Also reprehensible, you must pay attention to other. Manchester notes that Churchill also enjoyed the effect of gathering. His adjectives and squads of four, Menard Maganami was an eschewer and served accomplishments tireless. Joe Chamberlain was lively, sparkling, urgent, compulsive. Winston was famously a fan of repetition as well, and the way he could create a crescendo of emotional impact. See, for example, you ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word. It is victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be. Without victory there is no survival. We shall not go to the end. We shall fight for France. We shall fight for the overseas. We shall fight with growing confidence, growing step in the air. We shall defend our line, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beach. We shall fight on the landing ground. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender. Churchill's utilised channels, the reversal in the order of words and two overrides power phrases. A highly memorable words too. In 1942, after the Alien alliances won the first major war, victory of the war at AI Arulman, he said, now this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. And a few more winning examples. I am ready to meet my maker. Whenever my maker is ready for the great order of meeting me, another question. We shape our buildings, and afterwards our buildings shape us. I have taken more of the alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me. On a more micro level, diplomat Harold Nicholson said that all Churchill's devices, the winning formula and the one that never fails, was Winston's combination of great fights or oratory, with sudden swoops in the intimate and controversial. In the Churchill Factor, author and mayor of London Boris Johnson posits that Churchill's finest hour speech offers perhaps the best example of this arresting combo. Winston begins with never in the field of human conflict, what Johnson calls a promise and typically Churchill semicollocation for war. From here, he needless years has so much been owned by so many, so few. A string Johnson notes of short Anglo-Saxon singing. These massive swoops from the lofty to the subsequent part of homemade Churchill features too engaging. See, he spoke both to the country's well-educated scats as well as to the salt of the earth of labourers. His speeches could fire the emotional imagination and challenge the intellect by equal terms. There was truly something for everyone. 5. Build your argument towards an acceptable conclusion. The climax of oratory is reached by a rapid succession of waves of sound and vivid pitches. The audience is lighted by the changing scenes presented to their imagination. The ear is tickled by the rhythm of the language. Views and rises, a series of facts brought forward all point in common direction. The end appears in view before it is reached. The crowd anticipates the conclusion and the last words fall amid the thunder of session. Churchill called the ideal oratical flow outlined in the quotes above the accumulation of argument. It begins by placing the most important point first. Then the audience is swept along as you present different pictures of evidence, one after another, smoothly circulating between them. Sometimes the compiling of evidence merely consists of saying the same thing multiple times. In slightly different ways, if you have an important point to make, Churchill advised, don't try to be subtle or clever. Use a power drive, hit the point once, then come back and hit it again. Then hit it the third time, a tremendous whack. Finally reached the resounding, electrifying climax that reaches the audience but with one inescapable conclusion. Case in point, the fog war cabinet meetings of May 26, 2020, France has fallen. England's position figures at best. Churchill had just assumed the Prime Ministership, but his support was far from universal and his job security was tenuous. Italy began to make overturns, offering to help British negotiate peace with Hitler. Viscount Halifax, the foreign secretary, thought that given a precarious position, it would be prudent to enter into discussions. Churchill was, of course, disamentary, opposed to any such sentiment, arguing that nations which went down fighting rose again, but those which surrounded temporarily were finished. The debate between Halifax and Churchill went on and on for many hours, over many meetings. Finally, Churchill asked to speak with his outer cabinet, hoping that showing up broader support for his position might then decide the matter. He made his case to the 25-member board, and then concluded by saying, I have thought carefully in these last days whether it was part of my duty to consider entering into negotiations with that man Hitler, but it was hard to think that if we tried to make peace now, we should get better terms than if we fought now. The Germans would demand our fleet. That would be called disarmament. Our naval bases, much else. We should become a slave state through a British government, which would be Hitler's puppet, which would be set up. And where should we be at the end of all that? On the other side, we have immense reserves and advantages. I'm convinced that every one of you will rise up and team me down with my place if I were from a moment to come to it. Party of surrender. If this long idle story of ours is to end at last, let it end only when each one of us lies choking its own blood on the ground. Now that's a crime. 25 seasonal politicians rubbed with cheers and shouts, jumping from their seats and slapping Churchill on the back. Winston had won the day, and the future of the world was changing for them. Use rich imaginary and orgy. The ambition of human beings to extend their knowledge favours the belief that the unknown is only an extension of the known. That abstract and concrete are ruled by similar principles. That the finite and the infinite. The home are homogeneous. An apology connects or appears to connect these distant spheres. It appeals to everybody's knowledge of the sphere here and invites him to decide the problems that have baffled his powers of reason by the standard of the nursery at the heart. Influence exercises over the human mind apologies. It has always been immense, whether they translate an established truth into a simple language or whether they adversely aspire to reveal the unknown. They are among the most formidable weapons of us here. The effect upon the most cultivated audience is rhetorical. A speech which consists of dry facts and figures and neither engaging nor memorable. The human mind longs to have its imagination stirred and readily latches into pictures and compassionate. An analogy can cut through the chronic and confuse to offer graspable tool rope to understanding. A rich metaphor can often introduce a true aha moment that removes the veil from one's eyes and allows the listener to see something in a new way. Churchill had apparent ability to create such imagery and metaphors in his speech. His words, Manchester argues, become more real than scenes depicted, and more intricate than the sum of his grammatical strokes and rhetorical standings. Churchill spoke invariably of the jaws of winter and the desire to move into the broad sunlit uplands of peaceful future. He called the Germans cantankerous sheep and Hitler a bloodthirsty gunner sniper. His allegories could sometimes be witty. In regards to the growing Nazi threat, he said, a baboon in the forest is a matter of legitimate speculation. A baboon in the zoo is an object of public curiosity. But a baboon in your wife's bed is the cause of your... Yet for my money, Churchill's more advocate